Welcome to another episode of Table 41. Today we have a very special guest. She's a dear friend of mine. We graduated the conservatory together, at least for the undergrad, sort of. She finished school before me. But, um, and she's a very talented opera singer, and I think that we'll be hearing her name more and more often. And welcome, Ali Brigley.
Thank you. I'm really excited.
Um, so, Ali, right off the bat, when we were studying together, I don't think we have ever actually engaged about our past and what it was that got us into music in the first place.
No,
So,
I don't think so.
I was always curious to ask, so did you have like a role model growing up or musicians in the family, or how did you know that you wanted to be a singer?
Yeah. I didn't personally have a role model or someone in my family that did music right from the get-go. My family is very artistic. My great aunt owns a dance studio, so I was in
Okay.
dance by the time I was two. But it was really my mom who said that I was singing it in my crib. Like before I even turned one, she said we would do things like lullabies and stuff, but I would just wake up singing in a crib. And she had the inkling before I did. And I was in like I don't know, kindergarten, grade one, and I loved Disney princesses and I loved singing. Loved singing all those songs. And so my mom, she was the one who decided to put me in singing lessons when I was about six.
Wow,
And
that's very young. You
yeah,
hear that with instruments, but not quite with singing, because I think there's something
yeah.
developmentally like difficult about the
Yeah,
6-year-old singing, but
yeah. There is a bit of developmental factors, also like sense of pitch. Like it's every child
right.
is different. Like some people say you can actually train in a sense of perfect pitch. I don't know if that's true, but
I mean, given our sight singing classes, I think you were fine right off the bat. But yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there's something about being exposed to it quite young. Anyway, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I started singing lessons when I was six. We had to drive about 20 minutes to a different town because I grew up in a really small town called Coronation. It's only about 800 people, and
Okay.
so I started doing singing lessons when I was about six. And then that singing teacher moved away, and my new singing teacher was over an hour away. And I would drive there once to twice a week for singing lessons and choral and I just loved it. Like I knew from a very young age that that's what I wanted to do. I
Yeah.
didn't want to do
You were
anything but
looking
sing.
forward to it, and yeah, yeah,
Yes. Oh yeah. It was like the highlight of my week.
yeah. That's why. So, did you have any instruments in the house? Like, did you have a piano or something like? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we grew up with a piano. We had my grandma's old piano. I think that she played at our local church, and the church ended up getting a new piano, so we got that one when I was probably like three. There's a little home video of me singing ABCs and just bashing on the piano. And then we also had a drum set. I'm not sure how old I was when we got that, but my dad played in a band very briefly when he was in high school, and he was a
Okay.
drummer. So we had a drum set. And then I think that was pretty much it. My brother got a guitar, but
So, what do you think was the turning point that made you want to actually pursue this as a career? Because a lot of people have that early on, but then they either I don't want to say grow out of it because it's rather negative connotation,
mhm.
but usually musicians have, we'll say, a mildly formed stigma around you sure you want to pursue this because it's often associated to be like a fiscally irresponsible decision as an adult
Mhm.
as well. But and did you have any of that, or were your parents very supportive?
My parents were extremely supportive. My parents are a huge part. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for them. I mean, just driving an hour once to twice a week was
Yeah,
a
that's
lot. An hour there, hour back. Before I got my license, it was, and both my parents worked full-time jobs.
and
So
it's no mild sacrifice. Yeah, for
no, no, no,
sure,
no. And
absolutely.
the on top of doing singing lessons, I was in choir, I was in theory lessons, I was in piano, I was in dance for a few years. So my parents were, they're the reason I'm here. Like
I
they
mean,
really are.
we're all very grateful to your
Yeah.
parents for you not quitting music. I think, yeah, but there are challenges being a young musician trying to face this world as a professional, especially. And I do
Mhm.
want to hear some of your thoughts on that too. But so, what was the, I guess, instigating factor to? We went to U of A together,
Mhm.
just for those, because I didn't mention that. But so, what was your decision behind choosing the school and how you wanted to go about it?
Yeah, so I guess along when I was maybe in like later elementary school, I saw a production of Wicked, and I saw the song "Defying Gravity," where Elphaba sings the really really high stakes piece, and the way she sang it was just so passionate and powerful, and I was like, that is what I want to do. I want to be that. And that was when I decided I wanted to be a performer. So I asked my vocal teacher at the time.
So that was the last push, essentially.
That was the push, but I was
Okay.
pretty young still. I was probably like 12 or 11 when I got that, and I was like, yep,
Okay.
that's what I want to do. So I asked my music teacher, and she said that I need to start going to camp. So I started attending the Citadel Foot Theater School every summer, and
Okay,
they do
yeah.
musicals, like small spliced together musicals
Right.
over a couple of weeks. So I did that, and then my teacher, when we started looking at universities, she went to Augustana, and so she
Okay.
really pushed for it because she thought the small campus was really nurturing in ways that are different than bigger schools.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, the pianists, we were spoiled at it. I think like the main campus had to share, I mean, a larger number of instruments, but if you
Hmm.
look at the volume of students, the sign-up sheet would be rather crowded. But
Oh,
yeah,
totally.
we pretty much got a grand piano per student.
Yeah,
We were rather
honestly.
spoiled. But so, yeah, I think it's an excellent decision.
Hmm.
But so, and how did you find auditioning as a young, like, because I figured as a singer, it's a large part of your life, trying to
Hmm.
find a role, be a part of a production or whatnot. How how did you approach that being young?
Yeah, so auditioning, when I was young, it was drilled into me pretty early that you should not turn any opportunities down. Any chance you get to audition, you should do it. But also, you need to be patient, and you need to be very forgiving of yourself, like not allowing yourself to get worked up by rejection.
Right,
Rejection
right.
is you're going to get rejected way more than you're going to hear yeses. And so that was something I learned very early just from pep talks and doing little things like the foot theater school. Like everyone got a role, but wasn't necessarily the role you wanted, and that just meant that you got to contribute in a different way, and no part was any less important. So that was something I think I really value, was having that worked into my system like when I was young, because I
Right.
feel like I handle rejection a little bit better now as an
Okay,
adult.
makes sense. Yeah, it's I think you just like you're spot on. I think that's something many musicians don't really face until it's almost a little too late, which is
Hmm.
that fighting your ego thing,
Yeah.
because whether we like it or not, sometimes what it is that we do is rather personal,
Hmm.
and it definitely gets entangled in our identity. Um, so once you actually enrolled in school,
Hmm.
did it live up to your expectations? Was it rather different, or was it more or less the same? Because I hear a very interesting story. Me and Takumi were actually talking about something similar as well.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to hear what your opinion is.
So do you mean more so about Augustana or about school in general?
The school in general, like just the conservatory, like what did you think
Hmm.
was going to happen versus like how it actually went about?
Yeah, so each degree was a little bit different. My first degree, my undergrad, was pretty spot on what I thought it would be. I
Right.
made probably some of the best 4 years of my life. I made all of my long-term friends, my current partner, like all of them came from Augustana. Our friendship came from Augustana. And
Right.
so I really value my 4 years there. And then going into my master's program, it was COVID, so that was unexpected.
Right. That
But
was the yeah, that was the 2 years. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah. I started my
That's
master's in COVID, and it was definitely not what I had expected, but it was also more work than I thought it would be. Like I knew it was a
mhm.
master's degree, but it was more work in terms of I needed to do more work on myself and my instrument. I kind of thought, oh, I'll just be learning more techniques, and it was more so, no, you need to really go into the practice room and figure out what's going on technically. So it was a lot
Right.
more personal work. It was very emotional 2 years. I was I think down on myself at some points, but it was really rewarding. And then when that ended and I went into my third degree, it kind of went back to exactly what I
Well,
expected it to
yeah.
be.
Okay. Makes sense. So,
So,
but so during that COVID time, I do
mhm.
want to touch up on that. So you were doing a performance degree, is that correct?
Yes,
So it's a master's in performance, vocal
yes,
performance. And for those of you who don't know, she's a soprano.
yes.
So and how what is the I guess what does constitute I guess a master's degree for singing? Is it just mostly performing more challenging repertoire and challenging yourself to be a better version, or is it that after a certain point, the difficulty of the repertoire is minor at the point, because pianists often have it that way. We kind of
Mm-hmm.
stop working on a really difficult repertoire. It's about now the quality of the work that you're trying to bring, and we're not so concerned about meeting certain quotas and technique levels.
Yeah, that's a really complicated question just because as a vocalist, your instrument changes as you mature, as you
Right.
age, as you grow. So,
Yeah.
depending on when you do your masters, if you're in your 30s or 40s, or if you're like what I was 22, it's going to be totally different based on where you're at vocally. So, for myself, I was still very young vocally. So, my voice is
Right.
not, it's still not fully developed and fully figured out. So it was a lot about learning. I had to take like a history seminar where I learned a lot about the canonization in Western culture.
Okay.
And so
So this is just like a classical music in general, kind of.
yes,
Okay, okay.
exactly. So my first year of a performance degree was a lot of classwork, a lot of research, learning how to apply for grants, learning history, that sort of stuff. You can kind of either go the historical route or the theoretical route. I
Got
went
it.
more historical. And then the second year is your thesis year, which is where, as a performance major, your thesis is a final performance at the end of the year.
Right, it's like a recital.
Exactly, a recital. So what I did in the second year was it was learning rep, it was developing technique. It wasn't so much about the difficulty of the rep, more so as what fit your voice at that time. So
Got it.
I had to do some research and figure out what repertoire would suit my voice for where I was at, what characters, what roles.
Right.
So I did a lot of research developing my program, and then I had to make program notes and talk about like why I chose that song, where it came from. I had to deep dive into the poetry and the composer for each piece.
Right.
So ideally, if it wasn't COVID, there also would have been more performances of operas during that time. We have a very small opera program in there that is available for other majors too, not just performance majors. But ideally, there would have been a little bit more of that. But really, it's about figuring out your own instrument and then getting the scholarly aspect to justify the master's level of the degree.
Right, makes sense. So, right, it's truly unlike more of the undergrad where you're trying to find out the rudiments. You're saying that
Yeah.
this is where you're trying to incite some quality
Yes,
and
yes,
consistency.
yes.
So, okay, yeah, I think that's a very healthy way of looking at it.
Mhm.
So, I'm curious about the repertoire of a singer because, I mean, pianists are rather spoiled. We get a bunch of composers that are canonized, and most of them, as most instruments, usually have to train in piano, I'm sure voice alike. And we are rather spoiled in the amount of composers and volume of work.
Mhm.
But are you finding that most of your composers are, I don't know, Schubert, Schumann, leaders repeating, and then, or the operatic, I guess, repertoire is largely similar? Or is there another side of the world that maybe some of us laymen and other instrument players don't quite appreciate?
Yeah, so there is things that are outside of the canon. The canon will always be rudimentary for opera and for classical singing. That's just where so much of it developed, right? The language, the culture, the
Right.
technique. And there's something called the Fach system, FACH,
Right, yes.
which I'm sure you've heard about. And so that is all based up in the canon, mostly in Germany, but it's translatable throughout the whole thing. So that sort of repertoire will always be there, but there's so much new work being created, like modern, postmodern stuff for singers, which is a little bit more freeing in terms of people are composing now not so much for Fach, but for individual singers, and then
Right.
which I think has both its pluses and minuses, because then you kind of have to compare yourself to that person. Is my voice kind of like theirs? Should I be singing this repertoire?
And it's almost like a tailored, I guess.
Yeah.
It becomes a tailored repertoire.
Yeah.
And
And now there's this whole argument of should you be changing yourself to fit the repertoire, or should you be only singing repertoire that fits you, or should repertoire be more flexible? Should you be allowed to like change things to make it suit you?
I'd go
it's-
with the last one there, I think, personally, if I had a choice. I
Yeah.
think repertoire should just coincide to
Totally.
the performance, right?
Totally, and that's what you would think. That's where this more modern approach is coming, which is awesome. But then there's the Fach system, which
Yeah,
will
yeah.
never. I don't.
Rooted
think
in
it'll ever get-
tradition,
Exactly.
and yeah, of course. And I think it's probably like you said, and it's also really ingrained in that German culture of it with the rise of Singspiel, I think, right?
Singspiel, yeah.
That when you had the recitations had their own place, and
Yeah,
not
Russet
everything
was different by that point.
Yeah. Um, so do you think that you have a favorite, that repertoire archetype rather, to go about? Whether it is something that you favor in your voice, because I know it's rather individual and a hard question to answer,
Yeah.
but I am curious if you would lean one way rather than another, if you had to choose between two projects.
Yeah, that's hard. If I had to pick something that currently feels really good in my voice, it was
Yeah.
probably something more in the classical romantic era of opera
Right.
or something modern.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ellie, I know you took FKS. So it's a fundamental keyboard skills for those of you who don't know,
Yeah.
and so it's the fundamentals of playing
Yeah.
piano, understanding cadences, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
But how did you find that? Because I feel like every singer should answer this question.
Oh gosh. I am not a so I am a piano teacher, but I am not a immensely talented pianist. I know the basics. So FKS, for people who don't know, was covering things like they would give you a melody and you would have to come up with an accompaniment for it. You also had to learn how to read open score. You also had to learn how to see a piece in a different key and transpose it on the spot, learn how to cadence. It was that sort
Canon,
of stuff.
yeah, all that
Yes,
fun stuff.
all
Yeah,
of
yeah,
that fun stuff. And being able to read in different clefs, like play it on the piano. So it's a very useful, I think, especially if you were to do something where you're doing instrumental accompaniment or you're playing in a church. I think that is a very useful class, and I think it pushed me in a lot of good ways. Do I remember any of it?
Yeah,
That's a
okay.
different question. And did I do great in that class? I passed.
Okay, there we go. I mean, I'm a pianist, and I have a very similar sentiment to yours. So it is, yeah.
Did you have to take FKS?
Oh yeah, everybody.
Really?
We all have to take FKS, but
Interesting.
to us they allowed. We didn't have to take it as a full year course. We just
Mm-hmm.
took it in one semester, and we've had essentially classes, I believe, once every 2 weeks or something of the sort. So
Oh,
they
okay.
would just entrust us to, like, here are cadences, go practice them, like,
Yeah.
and then in the exam, all they will ask is, what's a perfect authentic or whatever.
Yeah. And did you
just,
have the green book too?
yeah,
Yeah, the
so,
same thing.
and
Okay.
so I guess the only difference between pianists and other instruments for that is that they spent less time with us, assuming that we understand what it is that being asked of us.
Yeah, yeah.
But and that's kind of fair,
Mhm.
given how they have to distribute the time. It would definitely not be fair to the other, like, instruments to have to do and be expected to do some technical proficiency stuff as well, like a canon, or if you don't play the piano, that is hardly fair. So
Oh, yeah.
I totally get that they would focus their attention and resources onto those students more. But I was surprised by how challenging I found it too.
Yeah,
Actually,
it was hard. It was a different way of playing.
nobody
at least
likes
for me.
alto clefs. But speaking of altos, so you were always wanting to be a soprano. It was in your range. And is there something that you can develop as a, or is that just a myth that
I don't know if you can always extend. You can talk about extending your range and being more comfortable in a different part of your voice, developing more comfortability. But your
Yeah.
voice is going to sing where it's most comfortable. That's part of like the Fox system. What that talks about. It's not that you can't sing the other repertoire. It's about where your voice thrives and feels the most
So
comfortable.
if it's comfortable in the head voice, you want to keep it there and want to develop that.
Yeah.
growing
And
up.
so, like, I didn't start as a soprano. I was an alto in choir,
Right.
very first. And I think, I don't want to make assumptions. I think my conductor put me there because I had quite a strong voice, quite a loud voice.
Yeah.
So, we don't like to use the word loud. I could
project.
project. And
Yeah, yeah.
so they needed, it's easier to hear the soprano part because it's higher. So she needed more of that in the alto. And I had a good middle range. And so I started in alto and then changed to soprano in high school. Not sure why. It wasn't my decision. That's where my choral teacher put me. And then when I went to Augustana, Dr. John Weeb put me as soprano 2. And I do remember being bitter about that because I loved singing the high notes, but I am quite powerful and project a lot when I'm up there. So each choir there needs to be balance. It's not about a soloist. It's about the
Right.
unified sound. So I don't really know how to answer that question other than like it's individual to the person and where they're comfortable, and it's also individual to if you're singing in a choir, what is the best sound.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So usually, you mentioned choirs. It's funny because all the people that I know that do choir these days, at least, are doing it as a hobby, and I'm very curious to ask, as a musician, I'm assuming you don't have other musical hobbies because rather we usually treat it as work after a certain point. But what do you think is your go-to hobbies, just to rest and
My go-to hobby is
yeah,
like outside of
outside
music.
of yeah, outside of music?
Oh, mm,
Well, music is a career for you now, so
I guess,
whether
yeah.
it's one that you enjoy, I'm sure, but it is. What do you do for fun when music is just too much?
Ooh, okay. When music becomes too much, I really enjoy scrapbooking. So I love to make scrapbooks by hand. I do also do some online, but I prefer to do by hand. And I love crocheting, and I love playing games with family or friends. So like
Like board
playing
game style? Yeah,
board
yeah, yeah.
games, doing escape rooms, things like that.
Cool.
Hmm
Escape room's terrifying me.
What? Really?
Yeah, because it feels like you're paying money for absolute strangers to absolute strangers to lock you up in a place that you don't know that just has a query of get out.
Yeah.
There's something inherently like mentally claustrophobic about that idea to me,
I guess that's
and
fair.
and I'm good. So I don't yeah no no no
We
my
should
cup
do
of tea.
one. I
Oh
think it'd be
God, no.
fun.
I love puzzles. So,
Yeah.
that's the messed up part because I think like all the roots of what that experience is
Yeah.
supposed to embody should be ideal
Yeah.
to me, but it's just that one thing.
It's just pretend.
Yeah, until it's not. Okay, I watched too many horror movies and too many
Yeah.
thrillers to know that
Yeah.
this is not good. Okay,
Fair.
this is
Okay.
the equivalent of like checking out something dark in the woods alone in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, no, just don't do it. We've seen this go wrong too many times.
That's
But
the funny thing about
anyway.
horror movies. You know it's going to be bad. You just know it's going to be bad, but you watch it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. It's mostly a roller coaster ride. You're not there for. Oh, I wonder what's gonna happen next.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
No, you know it's going to happen.
Yeah. So, um, after your studies at U of A, so
Mhm.
after you finished your performance masterate,
Mhm.
you went to the Boston Conservatory, the
Yes.
Berklee Conservatory,
Yes.
right? And what was the program that you went to there? So,
Yeah. So I like to use the comparison of like U of A, Augustana, like how it's one of the faculties. So
yeah, yeah,
Berkeley, one of the faculties is Boston Conservatory.
Boston
So we
Conservatory. That's right.
technically I have a Berkeley degree, but I studied at the conservatory, which is the classical area. So
Yeah.
and I did what's called a GPD, which is a graduate performance diploma.
Okay, got it.
hmm
And how did that differ from the masters that you did before?
Oh gosh, it was so different. It was very practical and performance based. Every class I took was meant to prepare you for the actual performance world. So I took an audition technique class, I took an opera business class, I
So
took
way less of that theoretical.
way less. I was
Okay.
writing close to no papers.
Okay.
It wasn't studying. It was my degree was designed. I only took like max 5 credits a semester, and everything was a credit. Like your lessons are a credit, coaching's a credit, opera's a credit, and then you only have
Got
2
it.
left for classes.
Right, understood.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah. By virtue of just going through the program, you're essentially it's more streamlined, is what you're saying, to
Yes.
what you actually wanted to do.
Exactly. It
So
was basically to get in. That you need to go under the assumption that you've done the masters, you've done the theory, the history, the research. You've
Right,
done
right.
that already. So this is where they're now okay. You are developed as a musician scholar. Now we
Right.
would like you to
So
actually do the performance aspect.
it's the full conservatory inclination of
Yes.
it all, rather than the university one.
Exactly. And
Right.
oh my gosh, I loved it. I got to take like a dance class, an acting class. I took a intimacy and stage combat class, like things that are actually
Stage comment. Sorry, back up for a second.
Yeah.
I don't want to go over that one. So can you walk me through that? This is the
Yeah.
first time I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, stage combat. It's like if you're doing any sort of fight, any sword play, any even something as small as a hair grab or a push, like that's something that you need to do safely.
Oh man, I feel like musicians with the hair grabbed down. But anyway, so
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. And
Mhm.
so it's like a choreography almost
It
for.
was totally
Yeah, yeah.
100%. Yeah, and same thing with intimacy. Like there's a new thing in opera is now called an intimacy director, someone who is there, and it used to just be okay, kiss now, go.
Yeah, and
And
now there has to be more. You consent.
hmm
Don't do this. Don't do
yeah,
that.
and there's choreography, and there's like, okay, this is exactly for how long you're gonna kiss, and this is, and while I think it's all good,
Yeah.
there's personally, I think there needs to be that balance of bringing some organicness into it, so it doesn't look robotic, but still being totally consensual and planned and organized.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm
Does that? Is it hard to overcome mentally? I feel like actors we take for granted. They work on it. They always do it. But
hmm
as musicians, we don't always sign up for all of that.
Yeah, totally.
So was that a barrier to overcome for you, or you think quite natural?
For me personally, no, because I had such a history in theater. Like I thought I
Right.
wanted to do musical theater when I was in high school. So I did a lot of theater camps, a lot of shows.
Mhm.
And so for me, it wasn't. But I have a lot of friends who had never done a stage kiss before or had never held hands on stage before. Like it's
Right.
for some
So
people, it's very new because that's not something you talk about in undergrad, really.
right, especially as a musician, it's not even as a singer. You would know that you
Hmm
are maybe in for some of that repertoire and whatnot, but it wouldn't be in the like the zeitgeist of
hmm
everyday life. And
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
so totally. Um, do you have any instruments that you wish you were as proficient at as you are at singing?
Ooh, yeah.
If you had to choose one, I know it's very hard.
That is really
I
hard.
have one for sure. I'll share mine too, well, if you want. It's a violin.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a lot of reasons, but in my hands, it's a toy. But one day, twinkle twinkle little star will sound like
It'll
a
sound
violin
good.
too. Yeah.
Oh, that's so hard. So I think if I had to, it would probably be very similar to yours, but the fiddle. Same
Fiddle.
instrument, but different style.
Okay. Okay. So like when I receive fiddle, I picture like the Irish. Yeah. Cool. That's
Yeah, I think so. Either that or cello. It's a
right.
tough choice. I love cello.
Yeah. Cello is just. You're right. It does have something about that bassy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. It gives me goosebumps. I've played cello before. My fiance actually got herself a cello, trying to learn simultaneously as I was trying to learn the
Wow.
violin. Excuse me. But that we're rather busy at the moment, so that's all we kept saying. So it's very hard. It's very hard. Yeah, and I have a very newfound respect. I always knew string instruments were just another beast to tackle altogether.
Totally.
But man, you don't quite appreciate it until you hold one of those and
No.
try to do it yourself.
Even like for me, like as a vocalist, like I can't imagine the hours that you spend in a practice room. Because like for a singer, you can't do that. I can't sing 8 hours in a row.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
absolutely.
how you're playing, like you said, oh, you told me recently, oh yeah, I spent like 2 good hours just hammering out this piece. I'm like, I can't just practice one thing in singing
Yeah.
for 2 hours. That's how you fry your vocal cords.
That's right.
So we have to do different things like marking or just reading and studying the score or listening or
Right.
playing our part on the piano. Like we have to approach it, which maybe for you, do you have to approach it in a bunch of different angles?
Actually, over time, I think it's rather individual.
Okay,
I
yeah.
think you're right to some extent that there are things that you do gas out on as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're a little different with the piano, you're right, but they're still there, and you still
Mm-hmm.
want to mitigate some of those issues. You don't want to have tendonitis in your
Yeah, I was gonna say,
20s,
don't you get sore if
Yeah,
you're
you
like,
do absolutely. So
Mhm.
there's some things you have to avoid. You have to stretch all the time. You have to you have to be rather tactical about how you
Mhm.
approach certain repertoire because
Mhm.
it's certainly not built the same. But largely, I find that I had to develop a different approach to different styles as well. Yeah,
Mhm.
like if the piece isn't very technically challenging, but there's a lot of it, there's a lot of volume to learn. Like I have to do 12 Tchaikovsky seasons or something like that. It's like 60 pages,
Mhm.
and you have to memorize it, let's say, in a month. So if you're doing that, you have to prioritize to maybe learn simultaneously several movements at the same time.
Mhm.
Sometimes you start backwards. You never know. Sometimes there's repeats, right? Like
Yeah.
this. Um, you have to have a very tailored approach to each particular rep. I think you
Mhm.
can't hide from that.
Totally.
But if you're doing a Beethoven sonata, sometimes it's a good idea to drill it. So, yeah. So And I don't think there's a right answer necessarily. I think some pianists handle it better than others.
Very individual.
Yeah. And I certainly would consider myself to be a worse pianist than composer in that sense.
Really?
Just because I think that proficiency of consistency, rather, I would say, of getting stuff done on time and memorized has always been a challenge to me. And
Yeah.
I guess I was never too studious either. I'm more of a, we'll say creative. That's
Yeah.
the nice word, right?
Yeah.
So, and I prefer to explore rather than drill, which I think most people do. And I'm
Totally.
just spoiled and don't want to
Totally.
do work sometimes.
Do you feel like, sorry, I'm going to ask a
No,
question now.
please, go
Do
ahead.
you feel like your schooling like prepared you for being able to practice in all these different ways, or do you find that something that you develop? Because for me personally, it's like my teachers give tools, and they say, oh, you should practice like this, but I had to kind of navigate and figure out, well, what's best for me? How do I learn music the best? How do I embody it? How do I memorize it? Like, I had to come up with my own techniques and kind of just take their information as, okay, I'll try it, but I'm going to do what works for me.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would share that sentiment.
Yeah.
Actually, I think, I had to, it's more or less the same. I've had to find out what works best for me, but I found that school for me was a rather isolating experience to some extent because at the end of the day, you don't learn that much. I know this sounds brutal, but and maybe a little too honest sometimes, or absent-minded. But one way or another, I felt that it is just you sitting on your butt and doing that work, and there's no two ways about it. And sometimes you need the discipline of schools and deadlines and all of that, but what you're doing is usually rather apparent to you early on, even before you enroll. There's no real magic recipe behind just sitting down and doing that work. So it's just playing more. I think that's what the benefit of school was to me more than anything else. It's just you have to meet certain quotas. There are standards, and they set you to a certain frame. You have to have them done by a certain date, and by virtue of that, you become better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not that you don't ever learn anything. Speaking of which, like theory, for instance, it's
Oh,
like,
gosh.
I mean, I love it. It's easy for me to say, but it's my bread and butter as a composer. It kind of has to be. But I never found it that challenging, but I thought that those were probably the most useful classes I've ever taken in my life. I can't imagine not taking theory classes, and if I had to take away anything from paying for university as that degree, that's probably like the pinnacle of what I got out of it.
Yeah. So I have a question now based on, do you
sure.
remember
Yeah.
taking Dr. Admiral's class where we had to compose in the Baroque style? Do you remember when we had to do that? So
Like the 4-part contrapuntal,
yes,
no parallel fifth.
no parallel
like,
fifths, yes. But like
Yeah, yeah.
nowadays, composing, can you put parallel fifths wherever you want?
Yeah, I mean, we don't. I don't compose an SITV for like
Okay,
usually. I don't.
okay, yeah.
Don't really. But if I want to, I mean, do you remember some of the formal analysis class? I think that's
Yes.
more relevant to that.
Oh,
It's less
okay.
that you're doing parallel fifth and here and there. You need to write an antecedent. You have to write a consequent to it. You need to know
Yes.
that it needs to have a subordinate theme. And if you are trying to fit a certain stylistic quota, we'll say,
Yeah.
right? But usually, no. I think we're rather liberal about how most composers approach their music, and I think I am too. So
Yeah.
I actually consider myself more of a modal rather than a tonal
Yeah.
writer, even
Yeah.
though I do root myself firmly in the tonic and whatnot sometimes. But most of the musical language that I try to explore mixes tonality into modality. I try to start it
Yeah.
one way and then maybe go somewhere else, and then maybe
Well, modes
resume.
are just so cool because they are, in a
Yeah.
way, I find them a little less restricting. In a way, you
No,
still have
you're
to be
spot on. You're
respectful
spot
of
on.
the
Yeah.
semitones and whole tones, but they're still so.
Absolutely. And they open up a whole new world. So aside from the Western tones, like for instance, I was experimenting with some Middle Eastern ones, like the makams. Like in combination, especially if you're looking at instruments that can play microtonalities and all of that, like outside of the piano's range, it becomes so interesting. You're thinking of like thousands of modes.
Oh,
Okay, maybe I'm
totally.
exaggerating, but like
But-
there's so much. There's so much freedom there, and the idea of a tonal center is a lot more mobile now. It really is. But anyway, yeah, I find all that rather fascinating. How did you find your music theory experience?
For me personally, it was more of a class that I had to do.
Right.
And I do think there's some benefit. And as a singer, like you need to know what's happening underneath you. Like it's not, and you need to know where your
Absolutely.
melody line's going. And it helps with the learning process. If you know, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's within this mode or this key, like, or, and this is what's happening, this is the chords you're creating. Like it can make more sense when you're trying to learn and memorize the pitches.
Yeah.
But for me, that was kind of the extent of it. A lot of it was confusing.
Yeah.
And it was a class I really had to work on. It was more, I always like to describe my partner and I, he is a lot more, he loves the theory, he loves the chords, he plays by ear, and he loves figuring things out that way. I personally
And
love.
he's quite good at that. I remember, I think Lane played piano for me once or twice. And it
Yeah.
was something like that. He was picking by ear, which is very impressive because a lot of musicians
Yeah.
don't actually train that in the classical discipline, right?
No, and it's something he must have developed as a kid because he did the classical route. He went through the RCM and did up
Yeah.
to his grade 8, and then in university he took a couple jazz classes. He like jazz piano, and
I
it's something.
certainly don't think it prepares you for that. So I think it's something you must have. Absolutely.
He must have had it, and it's annoying, but also amazing because we'll play this game. He'll be sitting at the piano, and I'm like, okay, now play this song, and he just can. He
Yeah,
just
yeah,
knows
yeah.
what it sounds like and knows where it is on the piano. He doesn't have perfect pitch, but he has really good relative pitch.
But he can match it.
Yeah.
Essentially, he can map it out, and yeah. That's
exactly.
yeah. So that's that element of musicality that I think classical music has lost a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think about improvising? I'm actually curious about this because, and correct me if I'm wrong, because singers usually in their repertoire range, we
Mhm.
imagine like the improvising are very confined to like a couple of cadenzas here and there,
Mhm.
but really that's about it, right?
Mhm.
And it's more ornamental,
Yes.
if anything else.
Yes.
Did that really change with some of the modern repertoire you've performed, or do you think that roughly the sentiment is still the same?
Yeah, in my personal experience, it's pretty much the same. I recently did a very modern piece that was composed in 2017, and
Mhm.
it was very still restricted. There was not much room for improvising more than like
Compositional intentionalism is still above the performance.
Yes.
Okay.
There'd be a situation where there was a piano was going to play this in repeat, and you had that. You could do your little singing ditty over that as
Mhm.
drawn out as you wanted. But then when you were done, then it kept going. But it was
Right,
still
right.
like this is the piano part, and it's going to repeat and repeat, and you have to sing these notes over however long you would like to. But it was still, these are the notes. It was more the rhythm that was flexible.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, there's not, in my experience, not a lot.
Hmm. And what do you think about that? Like, do you think that that's should be changed?
I think that there's definitely room for it if people want to do it more.
Yeah.
Myself, improvising makes me nervous. I like to have like singers, like that's part of, for me, what really lowers any stage anxiety is being prepared. And being prepared, improvising, you can be prepared, but also it's improvising. Like,
There's an aspect where you feel naked on stage.
yeah,
Kind of,
totally. Like that was something you did in a talent show at school. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
God.
Where
I
you had
forgot
the
about
bowl, you had the bowl, and you're like, someone pick, and it will be a key or a style or whatever, and then
Yeah.
you just improvised. I was like, how do you do that?
Okay. Yeah, I tried to forget that. Thanks for reminding me. I'm
welcome.
surprised you remember that.
I
Actually,
remember
that's-
it vividly.
Isn't that first year or something like that?
First or second year, Augustana's Got Talent.
Yeah, that happened. So
But-
we'll leave it there.
Sorry, yeah, to get
No,
back
it's all
to
good.
your question, I think there is room, and I think there's definitely some people that would love to see more of that vocally. It kind of goes back to that, scatting era. I think that's pretty cool.
Okay,
but
yeah.
for me personally, I like to be prepared, and I like to practice and get it comfortable in my voice. It's already so vulnerable singing. I don't know how I would feel like just going up there and having to do something. So that out of thin air, I don't know how it'll sound. It's very unpredictable. So
Yeah.
maybe that's something I'm lacking as a performer, something that I should really play around with more.
In your defense, though, it is not something reinforced at all in the
No,
classical,
no.
especially with a background in classical music
Yeah,
specifically.
That's true.
It is definitely something that is secondary to everything else.
Oh,
It is
totally.
ornamental at best.
And that's where we get into styles. Like I did go
Yeah.
to Berklee, but I was in the conservatory, which was classical. If you were to go to some of the jazz, songwriting, pop areas of Berklee, I'm
Right.
sure they would have a totally different answer.
Right. I think you're spot on.
Mm.
And I think that's what bums me out a little bit about the classical discipline is that very nature of it, because I don't really think that is inherent or historically actually even on point with that. The individualism of
Mm.
artistry was very, and performance was very important. Well,
Mm.
probably up to the classical era, to be fair. They codified everything by then.
Yeah, totally.
But if we look at Baroque and some of the practices before, and that Renaissance ideals towards artistry and musicianship in general, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it has its roots. Improvising has its roots,
Mm-hmm.
and it has its place. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it just kind of stagnated into really glorifying the composer and composer's
Mm-hmm.
intentions, which is great. I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
an intentionalist myself,
Yeah.
so I don't want to be a hypocrite. But there's also, you have to face the bell.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's maybe a little unfair, but also wonderful about music at the same time, is that as a painter or any other faculty that you have, you taste or you see things, when you explore those artistic mediums, you are seeing the every brushstroke of the artist that
Mm-hmm.
was intended. But as a musician, if you write music as a composer, it doesn't exist until a performance happens.
Really?
So music
Okay.
doesn't, well, think about it, like music doesn't actually exist in
Mm-hmm.
thought until it's performed.
Really?
Like the performance
Mm-hmm.
is the artistry of music,
Yeah.
because without it, it's just scores and they don't mean much. But if you look at a painting, you see every artist's intentional strokes, and you could see exactly what the artist wanted you to see. But as a composer, you have to capture that, and then no matter what happens, no matter what you leave behind,
Mm-hmm.
somebody else has to take that and make it their own, or
Yeah.
show it to the world.
So would you argue that if you were like you had a score and you were alone in a room and you played it, would you consider that having executed
But yeah,
what you're
I think,
implying?
yeah, so I think until it's performed, until the performance happens, the artistry of it isn't fulfilled.
And when you say performed, you mean physically played,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
necessarily
The
for an
music
audience.
manifests. That's right.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
until music is
Ah,
sounded out, it's just a theory.
interesting.
Uh,
Okay.
Unlike a painting, right? Like
Yeah.
um, so it's both an asset, but also to some extent a liability, because
Mm-hmm.
to people who really want to embrace that intentionalism, they want to control everything. They want,
Mm-hmm.
but even if a composer performs his own work, uh, it's always inconsistent. There's no way to actually replicate it unless you digitize it these days, but then you take away from a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a very fine world to navigate, but I wish it came back more.
Mm-hmm.
I do love improvising. I think
Yeah.
that this is like something that classical music can holistically embrace
Mm-hmm.
and change. And I think it shouldn't be taboo that we maybe destroy some of the classics
Yeah.
sometimes, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
That free range of exploration needs to happen. Speaking of which, I try to reinforce that in my students. I've been teaching recently. I never thought that I would make a good teacher. Still don't really think I am. But
Yeah.
I do try, and very much I'm still oriented in the performance side of things and being a working class composer. But I found that teaching showed a new side of musicianship that I think I'd taken for granted for a very long time. And I
Yeah.
know you teach too now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, given somebody that is largely still auditioning, performing, you're a performer first,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still teaching at the
Yes.
moment. So how do you feel that affects you?
You mean like the different side of musicianship, like with
Well,
teaching,
in
or?
general, what is your approach towards teaching? What's your mentality behind that? Do you quite enjoy that? Do you think it
Oh,
comes naturally?
okay,
Does it
totally.
change anything even
Totally.
in your?
So, teaching really has enforced in me that music is so individualistic. Like, kids learn. I think something with the classical route that is dangerous is that it assumes that kids all learn the same way.
It standardizes some
Yes,
things. Yes, that's right.
exactly. But
Okay.
kids, they learn in the structure. That type of structure would work really well for some kids, and I do have some students that learn really well in that sort of structure. But I also have students who get very frustrated if I try and impose those sort of teachings on them, and other kids kind of just want to come and we improvising is one of the first terms that I teach them. So while every time they learn a new term, we have a term sheet that they decorate with stickers. And every
I don't
time we
get
learn
any
a new
stickers.
word, we get to put a new sticker and write the term on. Improvising is one of the first ones that I teach them because kids love being able to just come to the piano and make noise and do whatever they want. And
Yeah.
same with singing. Sometimes we just play around and sing little warm-ups and make things up.
You want to reinforce that fearlessness that children bring.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
and that it's okay to play around and make mistakes and have fun. And music, it doesn't always have to be
Not in
so
my
strict.
classes, it's not. So you hear that, kids?
No.
My way or
Or
my
that.
way. So, so
My
there
way
we
or my way. That's funny.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think teaching has been so beneficial just for me having to navigate different ways of teaching. Like, I didn't realize, I knew this, but I didn't realize how much teaching rhythm is teaching fractions. Like, have you
Oh,
tried
yeah.
teaching fractions to a 6-year-old? It
Yeah.
it's
I
a
mean,
lot.
I'm actually such a bad teacher that, okay, you're going to laugh about this, but this is actually true.
Okay.
This actually happened. I've tried to teach a 9-year-old, which, in her defense,
Mhm.
picked it up beautifully.
Mhm.
But it was still challenging at first. But
Mhm.
I can't believe I was barking up the street. I tried to teach her a complex rhythm,
Mhm.
meter. Sorry, she did not need to know
Yeah.
complex meter. We just needed to know that a C is 4/4, and that it means common time.
Yes.
And we would have been okay
Yes.
for a while.
What would you do?
But I was like, here's 12/8,
Oh.
and this is, and here's how 12/8 works. See, it's very similar to 4/4
Oh my
because there is,
gosh.
but it's trimeter, and it's like, oh, you don't know what trimeter is?
Yeah.
Let's go. Yeah, oh
Let's
God.
back up.
Yeah. So this is about how I should have prepared better for that one in retrospect, but I really thought this it's no big deal.
Mhm.
But and then just midway through the class, it's like 30 minutes of me torturing this kid and her looking. She's like, oh, okay, but
Yeah.
what about? So is this compound meter or is this
Yeah.
complex? And I'm, oh my God, what
Oh,
did I do?
no.
I'm halfway through the class. I think I just scared the child off music.
Oh no.
And then in her credit, she overcame it, and she's still hanging on strong. But oh, midway through, I was like, why am I doing this to this child?
Yeah, yeah.
She'll never need to know what a
Oh,
12/8 is
gosh.
supposed to accomplish. But yeah, so that's about where I'm at with
Yeah,
teaching.
yeah, and it's so that's the other thing is why I love teaching one-on-one. Like my mom had asked me like for years, like, oh, you should just get your after ed degree just in case you want to teach in the school.
Right.
And I personally, I don't want to be confined to a curriculum. I want to be able to cater to every individual student,
Yeah.
and I love the one-on-one. I do teach in small groups sometimes,
Right.
but
Which you can do
which
for
you
many
can
things,
do.
but
yeah, but the one-on-one attention, like kids are already in school, like with lumped in with groups where teachers are amazing, like the patience they need and having to realize when students aren't getting it and knowing where to dedicate their time and on what topics. But I'm able to be so up and close and personal and figure out what they need and how I can help them. So like I had a student, he really was just struggling with figuring out how a whole note, how other notes can fit into that too. Like I'm like, a whole
Right.
note is 4 beats. How many other notes can you add up to make 4 beats?
you just reminded me of another fail.
Oh,
of what
no.
I did. I tried to explain dotted rhythm in the first lesson,
Oh gosh.
and I went up to 2 dots.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
How old was this student?
I'm ashamed to say it was the same kid.
This poor girl.
Yeah, but it's,
She must be pretty smart though. If you're like, oh yeah, we can tackle this. She must pick up pretty easily. If you're like,
no, I'm just that thick. But I would have done it with anyone. but I think I was fortunate
oh
in that
gosh.
kid was very bright. That's true.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's
No,
just
that's okay.
reliving the trauma.
No, it's
of-
totally okay.
yeah.
It's been fun figuring out like what kind of tools to use. Like I have fraction strips that my boyfriend's mom actually helped me make because she was a
Yeah.
math teacher. So I made fraction with like a whole one has a whole note and then the half notes and then the quarter and then the dotted and it's all in there. And then for this other boy who just could not get that 2 half notes equal to whole note, we took an apple and we cut it in half. And I said, this apple's a whole note. When we cut it, it is now 2 half notes. And he was like, whoa, that makes sense. And I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And it was one little concept. He's very young and he was doing a great job and he loves music, but it was just a really small concept he could not grasp. And I felt like I was failing as his teacher. I'm like, how can I not teach him what
So good.
2 half notes equal a whole note?
I'm 27 now, and I do that with money.
Oh.
That what you just described with the
Yeah.
apple is what my fiance does with me when we
Oh,
open the bank.
no.
Like, you see this?
Yeah.
This is not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's about.
No, but to answer the overarching question, I love teaching because it teaches me that there are more than one approaches to doing something. So if I find myself like needing to learn something or needing to change like something I've learned, go into an audition and then they're like, actually, we want it done this way. I need to be able to flip a switch and exemplify that I can do that, because that's how you get hired, is you're able to take coaching and then actually apply it.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Which, you know, I think you're doing it the right way.
oh, thanks.
For what it's worth, from another great teacher. You know, so I just wanted to put it out there, given that clearly I have such credence in this. So I am actually very curious. Would you? This is going to be personal, but I actually really want to know. For instance, I want to have 2 kids, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I was thinking, am I gonna push them towards music, or am I gonna observe it from a side, or am I gonna be just lying to myself that I'm doing that?
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna be strongly, we'll say, reinforcing certain behaviors and practices in that favor. Do you have anything like that you want your children to? What do you envision as when it's your own kids now? It's not just kids that are coming.
No, totally. I have thought about that a lot, and I've thought that, like, there's so many opportunities out there. Like, it's like, what do you put your kid in? Like, what if I put them in soccer, but they want to be a football player? And they, like, how do you figure that out? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I do want to start them in music at a young age, just to see if they even enjoy it. And if it goes by in a few years and they absolutely hate it and it's pulling teeth to get them to practice, I'm not going to make them do it. But I definitely...
I still pull teeth to practice. So...
Exactly. So I definitely want them in piano, and definitely want them singing in some way, whether it's with me, whether it's in a choir, whether singing somehow. And then I feel like piano is just a really good musical skill. It is such a good thing for pitch, for...
It is certainly the bread and butter for understanding most of the fundamentals.
It is. Like, me, if my memory's, like, when I applied for undergrad and I needed a certain singing level, you also needed a certain piano level to apply. Like, I needed a grade 6 RCM in piano to apply for singing. Like, it's bread and butter. So, just like you said. So, I definitely want them in piano. I probably wouldn't be their teacher. I would like them to get outside experience.
Same thing that I thought. Okay, I couldn't do that myself.
Yes, no, totally.
Yeah.
So I would definitely want them in piano, and hopefully singing in some way. And if they express more interest, then get them in lessons.
Well, I know you're not going to call me now to teach your kids, but...
Well, maybe.
But,
I'll come sit in a lesson, see how you do. What's your youngest student?
At the moment?
Yeah.
I have mostly adults.
Oh,
But,
interesting. Okay.
My youngest student right now is a 22-year-old.
Really?
But it wasn't like that until recently. I would say until recently was a 9-10-year-old.
Okay.
But yeah, mostly adults right now.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
It's mostly scheduling, actually.
Oh,
if I'm
yeah.
being honest with you, because although school and all this stuff is rather rudimentary for kids, they know exactly the routines, and it's easy to schedule to have consistency, which you do lack with adults. Sometimes, you know, you're at work doing a project, or you're away on some trip for work. You never know, right? And most adults also have kids, the ones that I teach, and they also have to make time for that.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, I found that works better for my schedule, because adults can maybe come in at 2 p.m. sometimes, because there's a day that they're not working. And and I figured that I click with them a little more than children. I know it breaks my heart, because I love kids, but I think that it's something that is less natural to me. That I feel like, see, you were just describing stickers and whatnot. Like, in my world, it's a lot like a communist building that's like all gray cement blocks. It's like, yes.
But that's good.
These are the scales, and you shall know them.
You will know them. I do start all my students, all of them learn C scales, even just for the under the bridge. And
under the bridge.
Our thumb goes under the bridge.
Finger don't go like that. That's how Ozan communicates.
Yeah.
But,
Your finger doesn't do that. No, I do. I love kids. But I really respect that about you, is that you know where you thrive and you stick there. Because so many people since I've started a studio have been like, you should teach choir. Let's do a choral. And I'm like, I respectfully don't want to. Like
Thank you,
that
but
is a
yeah,
whole another skill set that I did take conducting classes, and I've been in choir for, oh my gosh, over a decade. I've been in
yeah,
choirs. I've been in professional choirs. But it's not something I have passion for. And should you be doing it if you don't have passion for it?
yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, do you remember experience with me singing in
I do.
college?
Okay, I
So
think
that's the
you
white
would.
unicorn.
You didn't try. If you actually tried, I think you can sound okay.
Okay, we have a mutual friend. His name is Colden. He has an angelic voice. He's
Yes.
an amazing singer, and he had the misfortune of standing next to me for 2 years in choir
Oh no.
after you graduated, actually.
Is he in Monscore?
No. This was Augustana Choir.
Oh,
I
cool.
actually ended up doing Augustana Choir.
Right.
Come
I think you
Come
were in it with my brother too.
on. Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I was actually, and he was on my left. So there you go.
Oh,
You have
no.
two people you can ask as to how I went about that. But of course, Colden was jealous of my
Mm,
amazing voice,
mhm,
and
for sure.
he was.
He's
Yeah,
a very jealous person.
I know. He's just. And he was like, I will never be a better singer than you, Ozan.
Yeah.
And here, let me sing quieter at times, and then make you question everything you do in life. But so that was a trip. I loved it. I
Mhm.
loved it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Even though for the first 3 years, probably when we
refused.
studied, yeah, you remember that.
Yes, I do.
So categorically, but I think it developed me further. I always knew solfeggio was important, even
Yeah.
in like the old Soviet systems that we did back when. We still did that, and it was very much a like foundational skill that you had to have. And I knew it is important, but being in college, all high and mighty as a pianist, I didn't really think that there would be a substantial benefit to it. But Ardell, you were right.
Yeah. Oh.
Finally.
How did that taste?
Pretty good, actually.
Oh, good.
She's a very sweet lady.
Oh,
but,
I love her.
And I hope one day I have her on this podcast too. I'm actually working on that.
Yes. Totally.
We will forward her this.
Yes, we
and
will.
Roger
Ardell.
as well.
Ardell
Both
and
of
Roger.
you. Maybe one separately, and then you guys don't know. Right before you can talk about what you said, we'll have both of you together, and we'll oust some of those questions. But no.
They are the goal. They are the power couple.
Yeah. So just for reference, because we're talking right now,
yeah.
we're not explaining. So these are our professors, and they are married, and they live together, but they're astounding two human beings and musicians, and albeit very different.
So different.
So different in their approach. I'm curious how they're at home. I don't think we like.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. We will
Yeah,
embark on that
off
another
camera.
day. But yeah. But they're just an amazing couple, and they're amazing
They're
teachers.
inspirational.
And amazing musicians
Oh,
in their
yeah.
own right. And I want to. Yeah, I think I gave them grief. Looking back at it, I think I was
Oh gosh.
that. I think I was that moment where you go home and you talk over supper. Is like, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe we should have just go back to
No.
performing. And why are we teaching again?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what Ardell saw in us, but like everyone got to have different partners in sight singing except us.
Oh yeah,
we
yeah.
had to say we were partnered for everything, and I was like, "Why
Yeah.
is she doing this to me?"
I mean, yeah. So that was her sentiment. Mine, on the other hand, was yes. Yes, I'm getting a
Aw.
good singer.
Oh, that's good.
But Ali's like, no.
but no,
I'm
you,
getting a pianist
could
that's
play
gonna
the-
do it the night before.
Okay, but yes, that is true. We did it almost always the night before, but you could always play it on the piano. At least I didn't have to try and struggle through it. Like you'd be able to play our example. You could
Okay.
sight read that.
I mean, thank you. That's a little bar to clear, but
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, that was And okay, do you want to hear something really funny?
Yes.
I've done choir when I was 7 years old.
Oh
I
yeah.
never told this to anybody in college.
Okay.
This was like it was a trauma that I had.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's part of the reason I never wanted to sing with people. When I was 7 years old, we in those like Soviet academies, the music schools, when we go in, there's no age differentiation. It's just you're a first year. Okay, your first year signed up in the school. Go. You do choir with the rest of the school. And when you are like 7, 8 years old and you're standing next to a 12, 13-year-old, they're a grown adult now. To you.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
They have some fuzz on their face.
Yeah.
They're real. They're all
Yeah.
about that life. And you get terrified, and you're standing amongst adolescents. They're 16-year-olds. Even. Like, you can't even picture. and you're lost in the sea of sound. And there's literally, I think, 150 to 200 people in my
Whoa,
school.
big
Yeah,
choir.
and they just shove you in this like gymnasium-sized room with a stage and a piano on it, with a teacher with a mic saying, "Okay, let's go." And we're doing our like scales, and I don't know anything. This is like my first time, and everybody is like, "What is this kid doing? Why is he there?" And I started crying. I
Oh
was like, "This is
no.
terrible."
Oh
My mom got
no.
me out of it, and instead I did more solfeggio to compensate for that
Mhm.
credit. But man, that was a terrible experience.
Oh, I'm so
But
sorry.
yeah, there we go. I just want to share a
Oh,
trauma real quick. That's this is what this podcast is about. Do you want
yeah.
to share any of yours
Any
similar?
musical trauma? I don't know, honestly.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Let's start there. That's something that is ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you do not want.
But oh, that's heartbreaking. Little Ozan. But
But you know what's even funnier than that? Little Ozan didn't think he thought singing in front of people was embarrassing. But then fast forward, like when I was 10, I was doing Michael Jackson dances in front of a K to 12 school.
oh my,
Yeah,
why?
at a because I loved Michael Jackson, and the amount of fedoras that I had,
Oh
Allie.
no.
Oh man, I was like, I had it down. I had it down.
Yeah.
So, and I just thought this was a good idea. You know, I'm gonna get old like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
gonna, I'm gonna moonwalk my way to success, and those tapes are somewhere out there. My dad has so much dirt on me.
Insert one here. I need to see
Oh
this.
God. Yeah, we will if we ever find them.
Oh my
Hopefully
gosh.
not.
Can you do it now?
I
Like,
don't want to know.
like I know, but like, could you still if you tried?
Probably not.
No.
Probably not. But
Lost skill.
but as a kid, I got the moves. I
Yeah,
think.
I got the moves.
Yeah, but
Were you
anyway.
confident? Were you a confident kid?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I was. I did not care who I was performing in front of. I loved the attention.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I was such an attention diva.
Yeah.
And yeah, which is something that is actually difficult to overcome. Singers also get a lot of attention. How do you? What's your philosophy on that actually?
No.
So do you have to separate yourself from the ego? Because we mentioned it prior, but I do want to touch up on that. So what do you think about that? Because I'm sure you got a lot of attention for your singing. You're an amazing singer very
Well,
early
thank
on.
you. Unfortunately, I grew up in a very small town, very small school. Singing was not a priority there. I would sing the anthem quite a bit at things, at hockey games, at rodeos, at like school assemblies, things like that. And
Right.
I didn't get like from teachers. They were always like, "Oh yeah, you're great," but from my peers, I think they just found me annoying, to be honest. So it was more so like I didn't experience a lot of
It wasn't necessarily
praise.
a positive
yeah.
sort of attention always.
Yeah, my positive experience came from doing things like local festivals. Like I always sang in the
Right.
festival. I would sing at church. I would sing at I would go to the old folks' home and sing Christmas carols or go sing for my great grandma. And that was where I got the attention you're talking about, where people were like giving that affirmation that yes, you are good, you sound beautiful, you should keep doing this. That's where I got my positive affirmation. So it wasn't. I think I liked the attention for sure. I still love the attention, but it was never really from my peers. So I feel even today, like when my peers tell me that that was really good, or like when you're like, "Oh, Allie, that was amazing. You're so great." I'm like, okay. Like it's almost like I don't believe it.
Right.
I'm used to getting that affirmation from people much older than me. So like I was a
right.
huge
So-
teacher pet. Huge teacher's pet in all of my universities and
Wait, university? Really? I didn't really catch that in
Oh, that's
university in our
good.
classes.
that's good.
Not at all. Okay. It's interesting you say that because
Yeah, maybe not so much outwardly, but internally I was like, they need to like me. I need to be good. I need to have good relationships with my professors. And I think I
made
still do.
enemies before I made friends.
Oh, true. But
Yeah.
we were friends. And I think it was like there were there were people like, you're an acquired taste.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
No, I think truly, especially in undergrad, I was definitely like that. Yeah. But I still am very grateful that I think I went to Augustana and I did that smaller campus experience rather than a larger at first.
Yeah.
Because albeit I think whatever happened, people were still rather positive, and I think the
Yeah.
influence was rather nurturing.
It was. It really, and it was so personal and one-on-one, and the teachers genuinely cared, and you knew the name of every single person you were in class
And
with.
it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does.
It makes a
Yeah.
difference.
For sure.
Absolutely. So I forgot to ask the most important question
Wow.
of this.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. So what is art, Ali? Maybe we know the truth.
Oh gosh, these philosophical questions are not for me, but art is, I think, personally, it is an outward expression of creativity and passion.
Okay. I think that's a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
Thank you again.